to the Untitled Film Podcast.
Oh, I always love
with
this.
Callum and Johnny. I'm Johnny.
You sound like the voice from, do you remember the Monster Mash? I was out there one night.
Late one night, my eyes, something about a fright.
You did the mash.
Just reminds me of the Simpsons.
You put the wrong song on, didn't you? Why are you doing this to me? What's that got to do with Valentine's Day? Well, you know, monsters enjoying each other's company, coming together. You put the wrong song on, didn't you?
I think, speaking of wrong thing, you haven't introduced yourself. Who are you?
Oh, God, who am I? Callum, I think. Who are you?
Deep question. I've already introduced myself.
Did you? Oh, well, you probably did.
You were too busy trying to talk over me.
Yeah, every time.
Every bloody time.
Every bloody time.
But I have the control. And I can
Meanie.
make
You can make me
the
go
things
away.
happen.
You can erase me like Thanos with a snap.
And if you want
I'm not telling you
to
unless you turn my microphone back.
engage Callum in silencing him, gaslighting him, all these things, where, Callum, would they go to find that kind of situation where they could do that to you?
Well, they would go to Untitled Film Podcast on Facebook, Instagram, not on Twitter, not on Threads, but
Not on X.
Not on X. Oh,
Which
gosh,
is
yes.
Twitter.
I forgot. No one's going to call it
It's
that.
really confusing when I keep seeing, like, on X, so-and-so said this, and I'm like, it takes my brain a second to be like, on X? Oh.
It does take a moment to catch up. But we ask questions. We put out, fun stuff. For this one, actually, we asked a question because we're going to be reviewing 2 James Gunn movies, and he's into his needle drops. Just asking, what are your favourite needle drops? We didn't get any answers or responses, but Johnny, your favourite needle drop in a movie, what would you say? Yeah, it's a tough one.
Question.
So I'll give you a second to think. I've been thinking a lot about the one in Reservoir Dogs with Stuck in the Middle with You, just because of the juxtaposition, shocking moments, but a really cutesy song. I think that's a really good one. Another one would be Apocalypse Now. This is the end. I'm just trying to give you a little bit my
There's
more
a
time.
lot of in Apocalypse Now.
Yes.
Like, there's, yeah.
But the opening one, I think, is special.
Yeah. This is the end.
It doesn't have to be your absolute favourite, because otherwise we might have to cut out a lot of And
I quite like the use of 9 Inch Nails in what's the fucking film called?
are you talking about the opening credits of the
7. Yeah.
no, 7 or Girl with the Dragon Tattoo?
No, 7.
Oh, okay. Yeah,
The opening credits of Girl with the Dragon Tattoo is actually Trent Reznor and Karen O.
Yes, that's
covering a
right.
song.
That's right.
Because Darren Aronofsky, I was going to say, David Fincher has used him quite a lot.
He seems to like him a lot, likes that old troupe.
Yeah, there's some. There's actually as well. There's another one. Do you remember that awful film Wanted?
Oh, what with ironically with Chris Pratt playing a bully in it, but main lead to James McAvoy.
Yeah, with James McAvoy. The first part of that is they use a really good 9 Inch Nails song as well.
That film is so try hard.
Yeah, it really is.
Talk about 2008 distilled into a movie.
The Weavers of Time.
Post Zack Snyder, everything has to look gross and bronze, and it's all based around a cool trailer hook.
Anyway, we're not
talking about Wanted, but we are talking about comic book movies, of which Wanted. Hey, I did my own segue.
Just about.
No,
the little segue is just about. It's just about a comic book movie.
Just about. Well, I mean, it's based on the comic book,
Yeah.
but not as a superhero.
Anyway, before we get to that though, what about things that have been happening in the
That was
world?
a major
this week?
bang.
We were just talking about earlier how our podcast we think sounds like a professional podcast, and I feel like the first few minutes of the show maybe there's lots of there's
Well, that's where Rob comes into
smashing
play.
into the microphone. It's all gone Pete Tong.
This is where Rob pulls out a bottle of whiskey that says "in case of emergencies" while editing, and does a big.
Yeah.
Do you want to go first?
Yeah. Fuck it.
Why not? Why not?
This week has been like really riveting week on news, and there's been so many things happening. First thing that I was going to talk about is Tron Ares, which I'm quite excited about. Wow, because I am about the only person that quite dug the newish Tron movie.
I like it well enough.
It's mainly for the Daft Punk soundtrack, but I think I do quite like it actually. It's too long. The ending's not as good as it should be. The guy they got to play the lead isn't good enough, but other than that, I quite like it. And also the CGI for young.
Young Jeff Bridges.
Yeah, it's not right.
It's a bit spooky.
But anywho, Tron Ares was about to go into production in its first day of filming. But something's going on in Hollywood at the minute.
What would that be?
There is both a strike for the writers.
I've never heard of it.
And the actors. And they have shut down production and had to lay off 150 people due to the strike.
Good Lord.
And this is, I suppose, the crux of it. The thing is, and this is where it always comes down to like big corporations versus
the little guy.
People.
Yeah.
The corporations don't give a shit. The corporations just want what they want. It's all a game to them. Like it's points on the dollar. Whereas for the Actors Guilds, it's their life, and they don't want to be causing other people from other guilds and other things to be losing their jobs.
Well, that's what they've all been saying, is that we don't want to be out of work, but this is a necessary fight.
Yeah, and it goes back to like the trains in the UK or whatever. Like striking, it's really frustrating when you're caught on the wrong side of a strike, but it must be really even more frustrating to not be paid a reasonable wage. And I think, unfortunately, with particularly writing, but acting and writing, people haven't been for a while now because of changing models in payment and structures and things. And, they are really struggling. So come, comrade.
Come, comrade. Start banging the table in a minute.
But anyway, so I am very much in support of them. But everyone, can you get around the table and get your fingers out of your asses, which apparently is starting to happen now.
Starting to happen now. There's some movement with the writers, but not with the actors yet. It's the last thing I read.
But then I might have some news to talk about, because at the minute there's fuck all news. And Callum, what is your first piece of news?
Well, a sad one to begin with. Of course, William Friedkin, the director of The Exorcist and The French Connection and cult films like Cruising and Sorcerer, died last week. He was an immense talent. He's one of the kind of troupe of 70s filmmakers who, the reason why they're so celebrated is that no genre was he wasn't a guy that just did this or that or the other. He was just a great director of all genres. He could slip in and out. He did musicals. He did adaptations of plays. He did horror. He did gritty street crime dramas. Of course, Mark Kermode was not just a great admirer, but also a very close friend, because of all his documentaries he's done about The Exorcist and about The French Connection. And he was talking very eloquently, unlike me, recently on both his podcast, The Take, Kermode and Mayo's The Take, and also he wrote a piece for The Observer, which was very moving. And so I suggest people should read that. It's called My Friend Billy. And if you get a chance to check out any of his films, especially some of the more recent ones that are slightly underrated, like Killer Joe or Bug, I recommend people do
really
so.
I liked Killer Joe.
Yeah,
actually.
Me too. It didn't get spoken about much, except in like Matthew McConaughey is back, The Reconnaissance, but the film doesn't really get spoken about. But yeah, go check out, if there's any available, go check out those.
Yeah, I did see that actually. I leave the obits to you. You love an obit, so I kind of.
I do a lot.
It's like your favourite kind of news. Every time there's an obituary, you're in there.
It's worth talking about these people so that they're remembered.
If you say so.
And that's my excuse anyway.
You just love a death. Right.
Got no comeback for that.
What is there to come back? My second piece of news is there's a really weird film come out. It's called Gran Turismo.
Oh, yeah.
So for those of you in the world that remember the video game Gran Turismo, they've made a film of it, but they haven't. What they've actually made a film of, so there's a racing driver now called Jan Moldenbroek, I think his name is, who's a British guy who got who became the kind of first person or the poster child of this scheme that Nissan and Sony, I assume, whoever made Gran Turismo, concocted together, where they were going to find the best players of Gran Turismo in the world, and then they were going to put them in real race cars and put them in real races. And they've made a movie with David Harbour. David Harbour, is that his name? I'm really bad with names.
Yes, it is.
And they've made a movie with that, and it's really roguely directed by Neil Blomkamp, and it just feels like not a Neil Blomkamp movie. But there we go.
Yeah, no, I've heard the reviews have been sort of very mild. They seem to suggest that it's sports biopic straight down the line, and
seem that way.
Very much paint by numbers.
Which is so un-Blomkamp. Why isn't Sharlto Copley like chewing some scenery somewhere?
He could have played the David. Oh, he'd probably be good in the Orlando Bloom part, because the Orlando Bloom character is supposed to be like a sleazy guy who's kind of putting all this together kind of as a scheme. He seems like he'd be a better suited to be a sleazy kind of promoter sort of character. But anyway, it was Orlando Bloom they got.
Yeah, he isn't really sleazy.
No, he's
just bland.
Just bland.
Orlando Bland. Anyway, your second part.
Yes.
Of news. What is it? What is it? Tell me now.
Next month is going to be the Fantasia Film Festival, which is one of the big ones for genre cinema, horror, fantasy, science fiction, all that kind of stuff. It takes place at the historic Alamo Drafthouse in Texas. And
remember the Alamo.
Yes, remember the Alamo. And it's a big sort of the closest comparison would be the Curzon here, where it kind of treats indies and foreign films with the same reverence as it does blockbusters, and it's got a very good reputation amongst film fans. And the opening film is going to be the remake of The Toxic Avenger, starring Peter Dinklage, which is a remake of a Troma film. And for those who don't know, Troma is sort of this sleaze film kind of warehouse, like factory almost. Like they get very young, hungry filmmakers, all of whom like in the Roger Corman mold. You want to
be kind of cult horror, doesn't it?
Exactly.
Really?
It gets a cult horror, but it has a factory like working ethic in the sense that you get a young filmmaker who wants to make the next Oscar winner. Well, you get him to make the Toxic Avenger and make sure it's 90 minutes long, make sure there's some tits in it, and make sure something explodes, and then do whatever you want.
9 Toxic Avengers, isn't it like their biggest franchise?
It is. It's absolutely their biggest franchise. But I thought I'd pick this because, of course, we're going to be talking about James Gunn. James Gunn is one of these directors who cut his teeth making Troma films before making Slither, and then after Slither into the Marvel Cinematic Universe and beyond. So I thought it was a good piece, and also it sounds like a fun movie. Peter Dinklage is always good value, and I think that's actually quite a good candidate for a remake, for a horror comedy sort of remake, and it's going to be the opening night film at the Fantasia Film Festival.
Excellent. Fantastic. Well, speaking of James Gunn, we've got a James Gunn-tastic episode. We're going to be reviewing his first film for DC and his last film for Marvel.
Absolutely.
Not in that order, probably.
Not in that order. So we'll be starting with Guardians of the Galaxy 3. And then we'll be going on to The Suicide Squad, which is the sequel to the maligned film from the...
Is it a sequel? Is it a reboot?
We'll get into that, sadly.
What is it?
Nobody
knows.
Nobody knows.
It's just a thing. Which I kind of feel, just very quickly on a slight tangent, is a bit of a metaphor, I think, for what DC are going to try and do, where we're going to keep certain threads from the past, but we're going to get rid of quite a few things.
Blue Beetle apparently is going to be their connecting line, but Blue Beetle will be referencing characters from the old DC films, so who knows?
But also Blue Beetles, but everyone's like, oh no, it's basically been put in the bin and they wouldn't pay for like reshoots and things, so...
Yeah, it looks like it's being dumped.
Very much so. Anyway.
So who wants to take the synopsis for Guardians?
Guardians.
You sure?
Yeah.
Okay.
'Cause I'm a creep, I'm a loser. Open, Rocket Raccoon, walking through a place called Nowhere. To be really confusing because they keep saying nowhere and it's actually a place that's called Nowhere. We shall remember everyone from the Guardians of the Galaxy Christmas special, which everyone watched, of course. And you'll remember it from The Collector as well, but it doesn't look like that when The Collector's there. This is a new set. This is The Collector. What's his name?
Yes, that's the Benicio. Yeah, that is Collector, yeah.
And all of a sudden, and John Quill's drunk and depressed.
Peter Quill.
Peter Quill. Who's John Quill?
I don't know.
I think there is a John Quill somewhere. Anyway, but not in the film, not in the Guardians films. Anyway, Peter Quill is drunk and all over the show. And all of a sudden, some golden bastard smashes through a wall and tries to steal Rocket Raccoon and nearly kills him. And the Guardians have to get back together for one last time to go through space and time to find out Rocket's history, his past, and save his gosh darn life. And on the way, they'll meet some horrible bastard called, is it the Creator?
Yes.
They have some really bland names in Guardians, but anyway, the Creator, who thinks that he's basically a god and can create the perfect society. And is maybe not so good at it as he thinks he is. Callum, what did you think?
Well, I think that this is going to be an interesting discussion because usually, especially in the last kind of few months, we've been sort of like agreeing a lot. It's lots of 7 out of 10. Yeah, I'll give it a 7 too. 8 out of 10. No, I think I'll give that a 7, very much like that. And I think we might actually have slightly mixed words. Because
you're wrong.
I like this film, but I think I'm going to... I'll front load it with the flaws just because it is a Marvel film and it comes with the same Marvel baggage that all Marvel films, especially at this point, have, is that they're always a war between what Kevin Feige wants and what the director wants. And how successful a Marvel film is depends very much on how much the director wiggles his way out. I think James Gunn has got about at least a third of the film is his, but he does have to juggle all the various pieces, especially with the Avengers fallout, because, for example, he never wanted to kill off the character of Gamora. Yes, thank you. I almost forgot that. And now she's back, but in a different form, and she doesn't remember her past with the Guardians from the first two films and the Avengers movies. And so that's something he has to deal with. It's also because it's a large ensemble, all of whom are at different points in their contract. You have some actors who want out. Have some actors who are sticking in. So you can tell James Gunn is going, okay, put this character here because they've got to be around for 3 more films. But this character, they're retiring after this film. So placing the puzzle pieces all on a different place. And then, like all the Marvel films, the last half an hour to 45 minutes is just rat-a-tat, shoot, 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 boom, 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 explode, explode, explode. It's all that general stuff. And, that's boilerplate, business as usual Marvel. I think the interesting parts of this film is where James Gunn has managed to wrestle something out of it. What I appreciated, because I was trying to think, because I've seen this twice now, and, just a warning, slight box office tangent. Usually, especially recently, Marvel films aren't the box office juggernauts they once were, and they've tended to drop, like Thor dropped in its second weekend 68%, The Flash 72%, although that's DC. There was another one that recently Ant-Man 3 dropped 72%. So people are... you can get a good opening weekend, but as soon as people see it, they're telling their friends, this is shit. Wait for Disney Plus.
It's boring.
It's boring.
Or the people the inbuilt audience who are like, I must see every Marvel in the cinema will see it, and then everyone else waits for Disney
and everyone
Plus.
else. But this film was dropping very softly in the 30%. So people have been spreading the word, telling their friends, going to see it a second time. And I
also think Guardians managed to create a much broader appeal than most of them.
And it's got goodwill for its characters, but I don't think that alone is enough because the first 2 Guardians films didn't drop like that. So I think in the third of the film that James Gunn has managed to wrestle to himself, what he's made is a great bummer movie. And I do like a great bummer movie, and I think audiences are starting to get tired of the constant quipping, the unaffected irony, the constant, smugness. I think what this film manages to do, and what actually the Guardians do at their best, is that they're films that are basically about trauma and PTSD. All 3 films are. The first one and the second one alike. And this one, you have to conclude a lot of trauma. But the first act, you have to do a lot of trauma before getting to the shore. You got to get a lot through the Shawshank before you get to the redemption. And I think audiences appreciate just how well they handle Peter Quill's alcoholism at the death of Gamora. All the stuff to do with Rocket Raccoon isn't handled in a sweet, cutesy way. It's mean. And when this film wants to be, it's got a mean streak to it. And I think audiences actually appreciate having a film that in the moments when a director actually isn't banging his head against the wall going, oh, Kevin Feige wants me to put this in, and this actor doesn't want to do the films anymore, so he's out of his contract. When he gets to wrestle his chunk of the film, he makes a mean film and quite a brutal film. You can tell that this is a guy who cut his teeth on Troma and then cut his teeth making films like Slither. There's a horror filmmaker in some of these sections, like the opening fights with Adam Warlock, who's the golden bastard, as you refer to him. It's not a cutesy, fun time, punch, 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 save the day. Like, people get hurt, and some of it looks like it hurts, like properly hurts, in the most you can in a 12A PG-13 rating. And I think that people appreciate that there are some sections of this film which isn't just quippy Marvel time, fun times at the quippy corral, although there are those bits too. And I must say, I appreciated those moments. I appreciated it. And the villain, well, I'm not sure necessarily if he's my favorite Marvel villain. I think he's the one that I actually hated the most. Like, there's been more charismatic villains, like Michael B. Jordan in Black Panther's a really good one. Very charismatic, cool villain who has quite an empathetic backstory. When the thing happens and he starts mocking Rocket and he's saying, yes, Rocket, you win the crying game. Ah! I was just like, rip his fucking throat out. Rip his fucking throat out. I genuinely have had moments that were quite visceral, although that's all clumped in about a third of the film. That's
it's not even a third. It's like,
well, no,
10 minutes.
That section. But I mean, the third, of the total that James Gunn has wrestled to himself, to some of the stuff with Peter Quill and stuff like that. In the sections where he's managed to wrestle the film, like, my film, not yours, Kevin, mine. He's managed to make something that has moments of real hurt and real kind of good bummer film. But yeah, so I appreciated those moments. And the bits that I didn't like, it wasn't so much that I didn't like them, it was just, all right, business as usual, 10 hours of fighting and smashing, bashy, lasers, boom, 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 all that kind of stuff. Business as usual in Marvel land. But Johnny, I think you're going to slightly disagree here. So what would you think?
It's a mess. It's too long. I don't care about most of the storylines in it. The Rocket and most of the stuff with the creator are the best bits of it. But I still don't think that they are quite carried out as well as you seem to suggest, in my opinion. I think part of it, I came to it quite late. I didn't see it till it came on Disney Plus. I missed it in the cinema. And everyone was like, oh my God, I love it. It's so emotional. I cried. And then I saw it and I was like, I just didn't really connect that much. Maybe it's the fact Rocket I connect with a bit, but like, I don't know, you just whacked a few CGI animals in and then like, you're meant to cry at these animals. And I'm like, it's Marvel CGI. I think that's my problem with Marvel. I mean, if you haven't noticed this from the podcasts, I used to quite like Marvel, and I think they did a good job with the first part of the Infinity Saga for the most part. It was a couple of dud films, obviously. But they've always had their flaws. And like you say, just quippy. Nothing has any long-term thing. And if something has a long-term consequence, it lasts for about 2 minutes. Blah, blah, blah. And then the CGI is appalling on them, like, absolutely. And it really bad CGI really takes me out of a film. That's why I'm a practical effects guy overall. But bad CGI really fucking takes me out of a film, and there's some shitty CGI in this film. And ironically, this is at the better end of Marvel CGI, but it's still shitty at times.
I didn't think the CGI was too bad.
Well, if it was in... it's bad. It's not bad in the context of Marvel. It's bad in the context of cinema.
Yeah.
And it just is a mess. The Gamora stuff is terrible. You said, they handle the Peter Quill's kind of alcoholism at the start. Not really. He's a bit of a drunk, and then they go. He realizes that he could have helped Rocket maybe more if he wasn't drunk, and then goes, "I'm going to stop drinking." And still a bit sad about Gamora, but other than that, it doesn't really do a huge amount. Yeah, it just doesn't hang together for me. There are, you know what, the Rocket bits are reasonable and they are watchable, but it's by far the weakest of three movies. The music thing, which obviously is James, going back to our needle drop question, is James Gunn's shtick. Only one of them worked properly for me in this film.
I quite liked the one with the Beastie Boys. The hallway fight.
Yeah, I suppose so, maybe two. But like the first Guardians, every single one worked. The second Guardians, most of them worked. It wasn't quite as smooth as
This is the weakest one in terms of the soundtrack.
I think it's the weakest of the three films, personally. I think you may think two's weaker, but
I'd probably put it on par with two, because I think two is probably slightly more coherent, but I never really cared all that much about the villain. I even forget his... Oh, Ego. And you're right, they do have bad names. I mean, he was good. They were good in...
So on the nose, the creator.
Ego.
Adam Warlock.
The Drax the Destroyer.
Yeah.
I think Ego was good from the fact that he's played by Kurt Russell, but I think that, it's fairly just maniacal baddie.
Well, I thought it was quite interesting of like that's where where Peter Quill's trauma came from and stuff.
Sure.
But yeah, I think the Rocket stuff was by far the best handled stuff in it, and the Rocket stuff is good, and it's nice to give him a story. But everything else just felt like garnish that was kind of, but garnish that was 70% of the film. So it wasn't like, yeah.
Stop hitting the table. I do appreciate that. Well, like I said, the meanness. I did feel like there's a horror filmmaker in here in some of the sequences. Like there's a nice one where the creator is putting animals into this like test chamber, and because he's trying to create a perfect society where he's kind of filling it with sentient humanoid-like animals, and he's putting them in this machine, flicks a switch, and they're supposed to turn into this kind of 6-foot sentient animals. But of course, the first few tests don't work, and just a bit more blood, and that's something that you wouldn't be out of place in one of James Gunn's earlier films. And I liked that there were moments where like I said earlier, when he wanted to get mean, he gets mean. And I like that there's a bit more crunch in here, not just in the Rocket stuff. That's the stuff that's most talked about, but even that's mean. It's not done with like a pretty sort of animals passing away peacefully and with a tear in their eye. Although a moment like that comes a bit later. It's just boom, dead. Boom, dead. And I do like that James Gunn appreciates that somewhere in the guy who's been making corporate films for a while, there's still the guy that made Slither in there somewhere. I like that. And in the opening fight with Adam Warlock, there's some kind of crunch that there isn't usually in Marvel fights. I do appreciate that he tried to inject a little bit more kind of ouchy into some of and gnarly stuff into some of the sequences.
Yeah, maybe. I'm just going to put it out there. I think Marvel's dead now. I think, and if you're going, oh well, yeah, they let James Gunn be a little bit,
and that's always a little bit
crunchier.
That's always the thing with these movies, isn't it? Is that they say to the director, okay, you have 40 minutes or however much, and that's all yours, and you can. It's similar to Taika Waititi, although they handled it differently. That you get a real sense that both James and Taika and several of the other directors are banging their heads.
You definitely got that with
against the wall.
The new Doctor Strange.
Yeah, Sam Raimi banging his head against the wall. I think Taika Waititi deals with it by going, I'm just going to be completely deconstructionist. I don't care anymore. So I'm Thor: Love and Thunder. I'm just going to take the piss. Whereas in his 40 minutes, that's not Marvel world building. It's just him going, fuck it, I don't care. I get paid a lot to make these. And James is trying to get a little bit of something, but it's not huge.
The thing that's a bit weird and interesting of Marvel of late is, so when they first started out, they kind of got good jobbing directors like Jon Favreau and stuff.
Yeah, sure.
And then they kind of went through a phase and they tried to get a couple of...
like auteurs.
Yeah, and then they were like the whole first Ant-Man saga with
Edgar Wright
and stuff, and they were like, oh, and they backed off from it, and then they hired the Russo brothers, who, in turn were absolutely genius hires, but they were TV directors, and they almost like retreated back and went, oh, we'll go TV way, we can't handle these auteurs, and then they kind of decided to dip their toe in the water again. And actually, I think Guardians was one of the first ones, because it was an unknown franchise. Really, like not many people knew the Guardians of the Galaxy, And they obviously weren't sure if it was going to work. And I think they thought, well, we need to do something a bit different with this if it's going to work. And then they had great success with it. And that's when they brought in Taika to do the first of his Thors, the third Thor. And that's when they brought in Sam Raimi and stuff like that. So they obviously went through a period and went, we've got these auteurs. And they kind of let them have a bit of control in the first of those films.
Yes.
And then all of a sudden they went, we need to get back on course for the Infinity Saga. So they started to pull back on them. And I kind of got it at that point. I was like, okay, they need to kind of feed into this big thing that's coming up. But once that was finished, and bearing in mind, I'm still not quite convinced they know where they're going with this.
I don't think they do at all.
No, because they started to have all the stuff with with what's his name at the end of the Loki films, which now is very much in question because of allegations around him about the actor. But it just doesn't. Nothing feels it feels like they're stabbing like maybe multiverse is where we go, or maybe this time thing, or maybe something else, or. What are we doing? And they'd be better off just going, okay, James Gunn, finish off the story that you started with the first two and just have it. Just have this script. You've got to have these two scenes, because we will need to do those for the next
this character up or something.
And you need to not kill off, say, just going to put this out there, I don't think they killed off any of the Guardians, but we did, you can't kill off Peter Quill and you can't kill off this person because they've still got contracts and we are going to use them again. And other than that, have your fill and finish it off and make it a real fan movie.
You really can, if you listen closely to the film, you hear bang, bang. Yeah. What's that? Oh, that's James Gunn banging his head against the wall because he's had to trim his character that he really wanted to have, Adam Warlock, that he set up in the last movie. He can't not have him because he set him up, but Marvel doesn't want him, so he's trimmed him right down to the bone.
He's literally like 2 scenes.
And he's funny when he's on, because he's played by Will Poulter, very good actor, and you can see that he wants to have him. He just can't.
It's so shoehorned.
Where can he put him in?
Yeah, exactly. It's like so shoehorned.
Especially since I think he sets the film up quite well. Like that first fight.
Well, you think he's going to be like the big bad.
Exactly, because that first fight is quite a good sort of, oh, wow.
And then after then, it's just him standing in the room making witty quips occasionally. And that's about it. That's about the rest of the film.
Yes, it's a waste of Will Poulter.
Yeah.
He's very funny.
It's just... I think that's it. I'm disappointed in that. I don't think the Rocket stuff was as good as it was. It was good. It was at the better end of Marvel stuff of late, but it wasn't as good as it could have been. The Peter Quill stuff didn't work for me. The creator stuff was good, but again, he was probably one of the better things in it. But still, everything was fully rounded out, and then everything in between was just. I quite like Mantis and Thing and their jokes and stuff, but they're not really well thought out characters, and that all felt shoehorned in. And again, like what's Gamora's sister? Is it Nebula?
Nebula.
Like Cameron Gillian, who's a great director, great actress. Sorry. Again, they kind of like set her up to be something, and then she didn't really do much. And again, that's someone else. It's almost like they've got too many. Again, I'm sure this is a James Gunn thing. I'm sure he wanted these characters to be important. And Marvel wanted these characters to be important, and then they've ended up with none of them being important.
And even in their 2.5-hour scripts, because 40 of those pages is kind of designated, this is for the big final climax, punchy, punchy, punch, and this bit. Kevin Feige really wants this bit, and etc. etc. So really, he's got about 40 pages or so of his own, 40 to 50 pages of his own that he can. This is mine.
They just need to get rid of Kevin Feige.
They do.
I think the thing is, he was great at keeping it tight for the Infinity up to the end of the Infinity Saga.
And now he's just strangling it.
Yeah, he is. He's just taken too much control. They need to take a step back. They need to make only maybe 2 a year instead of like whacking about almost 4 a year at the minute.
I think it's
all the TV shows.
Frankly a miracle that this film did as well as it did at the box office, and that's only because of, like I said, there's goodwill for this character. This franchise, and also I think people resonated with the bits that most people resonated with the bits that James Gunn got.
I think people wanted to see these characters having their, because it was kind of very marketed as see your favorite characters in their final adventure.
We'll go out into the great beyond or something like that.
Yeah, exactly. So I understand why. I think there's a couple more of those coming up, but once they've come out, I think Because let's be honest, none of the new ones have really landed. None of the new
I think
characters.
this will be the last time, box office wise, again, sorry, boring, is that this will be the last time, at least for a long while, where a comic book movie has 30-something% drops in its second, third, fourth, fifth weekend. I think it's going to be 60s.
Did it do $1 billion?
It didn't, but it got to 850, which is...
I can't see. Maybe Spider-Man. Other than that,
other than Spider-Man, I mean, Ant-Man did 450. The Flash, not even 400. Thor: Love and Thunder got to 700, which is
maybe the first. Maybe when the first proper couple of James Gunn films start coming out of DC, they might do well. But again, I don't see them break. I just don't see any. I can't see any superhero movies that look like they're going to break the $1 billion barrier.
Not for a while. I think that time is.
They are dead.
I think that time is over.
Anyway, on that bombshell, we will go to an advertisement break. And we're back. Can you edit his line out, please, Rob? Thanks.
No, please leave me in.
Very much. So yeah, on to The Suicide Squad, not to be confused with Suicide Squad.
So Suicide Squad came out in 2016, and it got kicked around town. It was not liked.
It was a pile of shit.
It was directed, I believe, by
one of the best trailers of all time.
David
Ayers,
Ayers, I think. And
not Richard Ayoade.
No, not Richard Ayoade. And this film came out in 2021. Because of COVID, it got a simultaneous cinema and home video release, and it's sort of a quasi sequel to The Suicide Squad because it's using some of the same characters, but it's sort of resetting up the whole thing. So these are the baddies of the DC universe, but they're not like the top tier baddies. These are kind of the joke baddies. These are the baddies that people, Batman can punch him and throw him in jail. He's not someone you're going to worry about. And in this prison in Louisiana, I think it's called Blackwater, the person who runs the prison, Amanda Waller, says that to these crims with life sentences, you can go out on this very dangerous mission for me, Black Ops mission. You're probably going to die. Most likely you're going to die. And if you run during the mission, I'll detonate an explosion in your neck or blow your head up. But if you succeed, shaves 10 years off your sentence. So for these lifelong crims superheroes who have no chance of getting out, supervillains, they go, yeah, okay, let's do it. And they get sent on a Black Ops mission to a fictional South American country where they have to blow up something or destroy the Operation Starfish. And you got a few returning characters. Like you have Margot Robbie playing Harley Quinn, who was the one properly breakout thing from that early DC universe, and the one thing that people liked about Suicide Squad, not The Suicide Squad. And the team is led by Idris Elba's character, Bloodsport, who's an assassin. And you have several other very entertaining, colourful characters who straddle the line between outright villainy, but also possibly anti-hero at the end. Maybe they gain a conscience. So, Johnny, what did you think of The Suicide Squad?
I quite like it. So, just to preface this, the first Suicide Squad I hated. I think it's the only way to describe it. It felt like such a... it felt like a film where it'd be meddled with by so many people that even if the director had an original vision at some point, which at points is doubtful, there was nothing of it left. Obviously, Guardians had just come out at the time, which is ironic that they got James Gunn to do the Suicide Squad, and they'd obviously gone, people like pop songs. Let's just re-edit this whole movie with like obnoxious pop songs everywhere, and then they basically had no real ending. It was a pile of shit. So come around The Suicide Squad and I'm like, is this going to be good? Is it going to be bad? But actually, it works really well. The new kind of they kind of got rid of the most boring characters. There was some of the characters just really had very little to do, and replaced them with more interesting characters. There's a brilliant kind of fake out at the start of the film, which is really good fun. It looks a lot better. There's a lot more practical effects and a lot less bad CGI until you get to the kind of kaiju-esque ending.
But I'd argue that it actually looks pretty good. I thought that the kaiju
It doesn't look terrible.
had a good squishiness to it.
Yeah, I would agree. But other than that, it's quite practical. Like this feels like real visible sets.
Lots of squibs and things.
And squibs and stuff. I'd like Joel Kinnaman in the first one. He was one of the about 2 or 3 things I liked about it, and he's back in a kind of similar role, which was quite interesting. Harley Quinn's is great fun. Yeah, I there's not a lot that I didn't like about it. Is it perfect? No. I think there's maybe some pacing issues at certain times. I think maybe it's not quite as funny as it thinks it is at times. And it's maybe not like, oh my God, howled laughter, or oh my God, this action is amazing at all times. But overall, I really like it. How about you?
I think you pointed out something that it does have a scrappiness to it, which sometimes works against it, but I think most of the time...
Sometimes it works in its favour. Like,
but I think a lot of the time it gives it a sort of punk rock energy, because I had a similar experience to you with Guardians 3, where people said, oh my God, James Gunn has saved the Suicide Squad, and I went in going, oh, better be a 10 out of 10 classic. Oh, I'm so excited. Yeah, it's really good. And it took me 2 or 3 views.
I'm just going to say, I did not think Thingy 3 was...
No, I know, but just went in with higher expectations because people had been reviewing it quite highly because the first film was reviewed so poorly and was so bad. But I think after 2 or 3 views, I learned to appreciate that sort of punk rock energy. And I think what James Gunn gets right, that the first film, at least in the cut that we saw, because it's possible that David Ayers at one point tried to put this in, is that the Suicide Squad has always been a satire. It's since its origin, it's about this capitalist, this this Amanda Waller character who meddles in the lives of criminals who have no other choice and puts them on black ops missions. It's both satire
just like the Russian government.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's a satire for both how prisoners are treated, like sewing wallets and doing kind of unpaid labor in prisons, but also for American imperialism, just sticking a bunch of American thugs out into some South American country and say, go kill that thing. And all they know is killing. These are not good people. They're the supervillains, even the crap supervillains. Like you have one called Polka Dot Man, and the joke is, what does he do? Throw polka dots at people? He does throw polka dots at people. He has exploding polka dots. I mean, crap villains though they are, these people are, unhinged. They've got a screw loose. And I think the danger there is that you can make it a soapbox or a polemic, getting out the soapbox and going, do you get that this is a satire? But he also gets that you got to kind of hide that, like RoboCop and things like that. I'd buy that for $1. Back in the day, used to do is if you put enough bloodshed, swearing, and scrappy humor into a film, you can hide any sort of satire, and people would just go along with it. And I think that's what this gets right, is that it fronts its scrappy charm. It fronts its sometimes unlikable, sometimes likable characters. And also, it's not very sentimental. So in moments, because James Gunn sometimes has this problem, because he's quite a sophomoric humor, but he's a very intelligent man. Sometimes has this problem where he'll have characters hugging and learning and crying and laughing. And then they'll go tear apart people, like one of the characters is like a shark god, they're ripping people in half. He does it very well by fronting the fact that, well, these aren't good people. So even if they're learning a lesson in this regard, they're only learning a lesson in this instance,
in this tiny little context.
They still had no problem murdering people, sometimes for fun, because these are bad guys. Even though they do something heroic towards the end, they're still bad guys. And the difference between this and Guardians 3 is where, do you hear that? What's that banging sound? Is that James Gunn banging his head against the wall because he can't get a film he actually wants to make? This is a film where it seems like it's 90% undiluted Gunn, except for like the odd thing here and there, like this character needs to survive and that character, kill off that character all you like. But generally speaking, this is a film he wants to make, and it's no... it's completely reasonable why he, after finishing his contract with Marvel to finish the Guardians films, he then went over to become the guy who's now running DC, because it's like, they let him do whatever I want.
You can imagine he went in and was like, oh, I actually got to make the film I want to.
Yes.
And that is the thing, like, with DC's stuff, especially once they kind of cast aside the Zack Snyder side of things, they did seem to give directors a bit more kind of control in making the film that they wanted to make, and sometimes that's worked out really well. Shazam and I really liked Birds of Prey, and there's quite a few out there that they do feel a bit more scrappy that doesn't feel like an accountant's been sitting there going, you have to have this scene and you have to have this, and this has got to be for this quadrant and this has got to be for this quadrant, and and they seem like a bit more true to life. And then you've got a few of the flashes and things where it's gone horribly, horribly wrong. But at least they've kind of felt like they've given it a stab. Whereas Marvel, basically all of them feel like the Flash now, because all of the films don't work. And that's where they've given James Gunn enough rope to hang himself. And for the most part, he hasn't. For the most part, it works really well. It feels a bit fun and scrappy. It feels a bit silly. It feels a bit fresh, dare I say, at times for a superhero movie. But it still has all the things you want from a superhero movie in it. So it doesn't really go too far astray. And I think the thing with James Gunn is, like, the first Guardians, he seemed to be given a lot more rope than he is in the later ones. And he gets this stuff. He gets when to be a bit more sophomoric. He gets when to be a bit feely. He gets when to do a visual joke, when to do a pun, and he kind of gets the balance about right. I'm not saying he's a perfect director, but he seems to get it about right. And Marvel seem to have pulled that away from him with Guardians 3, in my opinion. So,
and he's a very intelligent man. So even if he does, he's not above making a few knob gags, like actually quite a few knob gags in Suicide Squad. But I've got no problem. I grew up on Bottom and Rick Mayall, so knob gags all the way, baby. But he's also very cine literate. So for this film, its staple is things like those old war movies where you'd get a bunch of thugs out with guns, but hey, they're killing Nazis, so they're on our side. So like the Dirty Dozen, like the opening 15 minutes, you said there's a great fake out, and it spends the whole first 15 minutes, minor spoiler, but it's only past the first 15 minutes, setting up this whole different team without Idris Elba, who's the leader of the kind of team of characters that we actually follow. This whole different team, like this is your brothers and sisters for the next however many weeks. We're gonna, and they do this whole thing, and then instantly murders all of them in a gloriously gooey, very sort of old-fashioned war movie. Lots of blood squibs, and he's having fun because he scores the opening. Of course, he's got a great choice of soundtrack. The opening song is "People Who Died" by Jim Carroll. The Jim Carroll band's a really great punk song, and so it's the Dirty Dozen meets the Dead Kennedys, and that's sort of the theme of the whole thing going forward. It's a guy who knows his cinema, knows his music, to make a film that's both scrappy, sophomoric, gooey, and lots of oozy things happening.
It also feels like it's got a bit of fun flair about it. Like there's some great some great zooms and some great whips and some great. It feels
very good
visually
photography.
Yeah, it does.
Very kinetic.
Whereas, which again, you don't often get from superhero movies, other than like Spider-Verse and things like that. Like most superhero movies, like plonk the camera down. There's going to be a lot of action. It'll be very complicated for the poor editors to do all the CGI if you're moving the camera around too much, or it's shaky cam and you can't see what's going on. There's no in between. Whereas this, it felt like. It felt a lot more indie. It felt a lot more scrappy.
And it's nice to have Peter Capaldi in a big blockbuster playing a baddie.
And he was good fun as well, isn't it?
He has one of the best lines where there's one of the anti-heroes is called Ratcatcher 2, who can control rats. And, they're taking him somewhere because he's an evil genius. And he's taunting her, and he says something. She says something like, "Would you like 100 angry rodents crawling up your ass?" "Oh, I think the answer I give you, my dear, won't be the one you want."
Exactly, and that is the kind of James Gunn humour I'm here for.
Yeah.
Anyway, on that, I think that is time probably to end our
Wraps
show.
are all up.
So, Callum, what did you think of Guardians of the Galaxy 3?
I think that when James Gunn was allowed to make something good, he pulled it off, and I think it's obvious to me why it seemed to click with people. I like the mean stuff. I like the sort of crunchier stuff, but it is hidden around, business as usual in Marvel land. So 6 out of 10. So I liked it, but I'm not going to pretend like it's any classic or anything.
I'm between two scores. One, I'm going for the nicer of the two scores.
Okay.
And I'm going for the nicer of the two scores because the Rocket stuff I do quite like. I did really like the opening scene with Creep, and I was like,
here we go.
I did like the creator, and I did like some of the joking stuff around with the Guardians, and I liked the two scenes that Adam Warlock got as well. Basically, I like the James Gunn stuff.
Yes, exactly.
So I'm going to give it a 5.
Oh, okay. I thought you were going for a 4. Yeah,
I was very close to 4. That was my unkind score. So I'm going to give it a 5. I'm going to be generous, but it's close. It's only a scraped 5. And Callum, what did you think of
The Suicide Squad?
Yeah,
definite articles here, bitch. It's scrappy, it's funny, it's very charming. It reminds me of the kinds of movies I watched growing up, like RoboCop and stuff, but with a touch of kind of Clint Eastwood's "Let's go kill the Nazis, use any means necessary, lads" sort of movie. It's cine literate. It has a good punk rock ethos in its satire. It's not afraid to punch up at some kind of real life baddies, while also sticking in some gooey, nice, crunchy, lovely. This is from the on the poster it should say from the guy that made Slither rather than from the guy that made Guardians of the Galaxy. 8 out of 10, quite a comfortable 8.
I again really liked the scrappiness, the silliness. I liked how it was done. I think if compared to what is going on with most superhero movies at the minute, it felt very fresh. It kind of gives me a bit of excitement for what is going to go on to the rest of the DC universe. And I'm also quite excited. I was also quite happy with the whole what's the word I'm looking for? Like the piece. We didn't actually talk about John Cena and Peacemaker at all.
No, we didn't.
But they did a spin-off show with that as well, which is very. I think James Gunn had written all of it and was very heavily.
I think he directed all of it.
I think he did as well. Yeah, and that's excellent. So it's given me quite a lot of hope for the universe. So I'm going to give it a very comfortable 8 as well. I did toy with a 9, but I thought maybe that's a bit too much. But
yeah, I kind of did as well. But yeah, an 8 is where we live.
So a nice happy 8, not even like a scrape 8. So yeah, that's where we are. So it's kind of like a 5.5 for.
I think
Guardians
that's probably
3.
a reasonable score for it,
And then a very, very happy 8 for the Suicide Squad. So if you haven't seen that yet, go out and see it. So once again, everybody, thanks for listening. Don't forget to go onto our Instagram and our Facebook and follow us, like us, answer questions. And we will speak to you again soon.
See you later.
Bye.
Bye.
Cause I'm a creep, I'm a loser.